Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak to you today about our WisFIRS application, WisFIRS Lands, or Wisconsin Forest Inventory and Reporting System. So the plan for today is basically to give a high-level overview of why we're building it, how did we integrate GIS, what's on the docket next, and I'll be doing that portion of the presentation, and then I'll turn it over to John so that you all can get a look at the application and see how it works. And we'll try and leave a little time at the end for questions. So why are we building WisFIRS? Well, at the DNR, like many other programs at DNR actually over the years, we got really good at building independent systems that used various forms of technology and that really didn't work well together, even though they had areas of commonality. So in Forestry's case, we have the recon system, the managed forest law system, and the plant track system, all of which were built independently and in different technologies, but had various levels of overlap with each other. And they just didn't honestly work well together. So we had issues with redundant data entry, we had issues with coding being different between systems, that kind of thing. So we thought, we really need to get these better integrated. And the one area that they all had in common was simply that the information that was being collected was tied to a piece of land on the landscape. So ultimately we knew that GIS was going to be an important tool to help us reach our integration goals for these systems. And thus WisFIRS was born. So again, the goal of WisFIRS was basically to provide a tool that allowed us to identify that chunk of dirt, as we affectionately call it, that we manage on the state, county, and private forest tax law lands in the state, and tie business data about that chunk of land together for both private and public forests. Just to give you an idea of the distribution of forest ownership in Wisconsin, I think it's kind of interesting. Public ownership between federal, county, and state lands is about 30%, and private ownership makes up 70%. That's non-industrial private landowners, industrial landowners, and private corporations. In terms of acreage, this is acreage that we manage in the WisFIRS system. Managed forest lands, which are privately owned, are roughly 3 million acres. Forest crop lands, program was the precursor to the managed forest land program, and that is also private lands, roughly 244,000 acres. County forests across 29 counties in the state are publicly owned and make up 2.3 million acres, and state forests about 500,000 acres. These numbers actually are from 2011, so I've been told more accurate number, total number would probably be about 7.3 million acres of land that we actually manage through WisFIRS at this point. And spatially looking at the lands that we manage in WisFIRS, it's a nice little map here to see all the land that we manage through the WisFIRS application. So who's our user community? As far as public lands go, we have about 230 DNR foresters that are distributed around the state, some more remotely located than others. We also work very closely with 70 county foresters that also use the WisFIRS system to help manage their forests, their county forest lands. And for private lands, we have about 170 consultant foresters also outside the DNR network. So we have disconnected users and connected users inside DNR, all using WisFIRS. So overall, some of the things WisFIRS will enable foresters to do is to store the data they collect in the field with all their recon data, use a template for management plans, plan and track the practices and the treatments that go on the landscape, report their accomplishments, renew cooperating forester status, administer our managed forest law program, calculate payments to municipalities, and a lot of other things which I'm not going to go into today, but so it's a pretty extensive system. Given the size of the system, we thought it was prudent to divide the development up into what we call releases, different releases. R1 and R2 in the burnt orange color here are actually already completed, and the portion that John's going to show you today is Release 2, the public GIS integration portion, so those are completed. Presently, we're working on Release 3, which is our private lands business portion, so all the tabular data for our private lands program is being worked on at the moment. And Releases 4, 5, 6, and 7, which includes the private GIS implementation, are still on the dock to be completed. So, how did we implement the GIS? Given that we are, given our business requirements and also that we are a Microsoft Esri Oracle shop, the development team decided that our GIS server was going to be the best way to pursue implementing GIS in WisFIRS. It supported a centralized system concept, reduced our management overhead, improves our ability to manage disaster recovery, reduces licensing costs, positioned us well for field data capture, and it was consistent with Esri's long-term strategy. We also do have a desktop solution for our power users who are comfortable using desktop ArcGIS. Allows them to edit shapes and upload them into the WisFIRS system. Some of the core technologies that we're using, as I mentioned, we're an Oracle shop, so we do use Oracle 11G for storing our tabular and our GIS application data. We are using ArcGIS server. Technically, as of today, we're still in 10.0. We are working to convert that to 10.1 for our geoprocessing processes. We are using desktop 10.1 for those who wish to use desktop for editing shapes and uploading them to the server. We use Microsoft Internet Information Server for running our tabular and our GIS web applications. We use Python for our geoprocessing scripts, jQuery for the client-side application code for GIS, JavaScript for the client-side tabular and GIS application code, VisualBasic.net, C#.net, and SSRS for all of our reporting functions. So what's next? As I mentioned earlier, we are currently working on our private lands business data, or the tabular side of private lands for WisFIRS, but we would like to get the private lands GIS implemented as soon as possible, as soon as that's done. In the meantime, while we're waiting for that to be completed, we are working on digitizing the existing managed forest lands. Currently, they are only in hard copy map form. We've hired an LTE to digitize those lands so that we can more accurately depict those. And we are working with the state cartographer's office to obtain parcel data for that project. But the long-term goal is to actually have all the maintenance of the Untitled lands through the WisFIRS system. So, with that overview, I'm going to turn it over to John, and he's going to give you a little demo of the application.
Morning. Has anybody been into the WisFIRS system? Do I have users in the audience that have seen the system live before? Okay, so hopefully this will be new information, or at least new experience for you. I'm going to risk doing a live demo, so we'll see how this falls out. The network seems to be pretty good at the facility. Our entryway, we have internal users obviously within the department, and we also have through our World Wide Web presence a portal for our partners to get into the system. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm actually going to launch into, from our dnr.wi.gov, the public lands application. It does require that I have a Wisconsin or a Web Access Management System account. And this login is what controls my editability in the system. So we forced the workflow, as Ann discussed. We released this private lands application in 2007. And then after we went live, we began building the GIS application, and that went live in 2011. Everything you're seeing is for public lands management, so the container is that property boundary. The way the department and the Division of Forestry works, though, we don't have edit privileges to property boundaries. That's done through our real estate program. So we have a container we call WisFIRS management boundary, which is analogous to a property boundary, but it gives us editability so that our foresters and other editors can come in and manage properties and respond quickly to acquisitions and sales and get their recon done on those properties. And the driver behind this is obviously getting recon into the system, on-the-ground management for sustainable forestry. When you first enter the system, you have just a couple of general tabs at the top. You land on the Properties tab. Most of the tabs also have submenus for additional functionality. And then below that, we've just broken everything up into sections. We have different navigation options to find properties you're looking for. If you know the property, everything's numbered in the system. If you know your property number or compartment or stand, it's a nested hierarchy. So within the property is a sort of an artificial unit we call compartments. They're generally areas of access. You know, can we get into these areas? Within those, there's stands that are homogeneous timber types, generally that have the same sort of treatment or the same considerations on the ground. The second section you'll see is the properties that I have editability for. Once I'm in WisFIRS as a user, I can read all the property information statewide for all the public lands. If I knew the name of a property, I could come down here and search for that property. For instance, if I wanted to look up Gov Knolls information, I can simply do a description of Gov. I see all the properties with Gov Knolls or Gov in the name, and I can begin to work with the Gov Knolls property, jumping over to the Recon tab and looking up information about that property. Everywhere you see a globe is a point at which I can jump over to the GIS application. We've kind of made the GIS application intelligent then. It knows the launching point, so if I leave from this page looking at Recon on the compartment submenu, that's where I would land in the GIS app. That compartment would be pre-selected for me as if I had done the navigation on the GIS app. You can see now that I've declared a property to work with. Gov Knolls here, property number 4979. I get a few more tabs of activity across the top. I can begin to schedule treatments for properties. I have all the planning that goes along with that property on our master planning cycle. I can manage my timber sales, as well as the reports and talked about that can come out of the system. Because I'm an administrator in the system, I also have an administrative tab that doesn't show up to the general user, so I can go in and grant access to users for edit to different properties. I can give them temporary access if they need to edit an adjacent property with cooperation with that property manager, and then I can deny access. We mainly did that so when we got on the GIS side where we had counties meeting other counties, we could start taking care of some of those edge matching problems. So the counties talk together, they give somebody edit authority, they can start working out those issues of matching property descriptions and making sure that boundaries line up. So I'll just give you a quick demo of, I'm going to jump over to stands here, and these are some existing stands in the system. If I want to see more detail, I can go look at the actual recon information all the way down for what's been done on the ground for that stand. This is all grayed out because I am not an editor of the Gov Knolls property, so I can't change anything. This is all read-only to me. If I wanted to see where that was over in the GIS application, this is going to be my first launch of that. I hit one of those globes, and now a second instance of Internet Explorer opens, and so I have two browsers open, and now I'm looking at the GIS portion of the application. I should have mentioned at the beginning that this is all developed within the Department for Internet Explorer, Microsoft Internet Explorer. We do have users using all the other browsers that are out there, but we don't have those browsers internal. Sometimes we can't predict behavior. We do get reports back that Safari, Chrome, all those are working just fine within the application. But all our development is done on IE. You can see when I land in the GIS app that the stand I launched from on the tabular side of the application, the data-driven side of the application, is already pre-selected for me. The GIS portion of the application is then designed in sort of this tool ribbon concept with different tool groups. So we have our kind of our working layer tool group, the properties listed, the compartment and the stand that it came from on the tabular side is pre-populated up there. The layer in which I'm working with, in this case it came from stands, so the active layer is already preset to stands. It doesn't preclude me from going anywhere else and navigating to some other piece of property or zooming to somewhere else on the map. It's just trying to be a little intelligent for us. We have a navigation toolbar with all the standard GIS tools for zooming in, zooming out, panning the map. We've also built in a few zoom to features that our foresters like. Zooming to specific latitude longitudes, zooming to specific scale, their favorite 15, 840, 79, 20, they're at 4 inches and 8 inches to a mile. Foresters' preferred scales. We can jump to counties. We can also zoom very quickly to a count range and section. As far as the application itself goes, you always have the tabular side of the application running in another instance of the browser. And we've forced the workflow that you always come from the tabular application to the GIS application. So if I close the tabular application right now, the GIS application is going to fold up as well. But I can work independent of the GIS application and have that closed and come back over to the tabular application and work back and forth. So we've forced that one-way workflow. As an example of that, we require the staff, if they were actually going to enter recon on property, that they would go in and have actually done the work on the ground and have information on the recon for that particular chunk of dirt to enter into the system. Then they would go map it. A lot of them like to go out and kind of flesh out the mapping ahead of time, and there's some tricks in the system that we've allowed to happen to kind of come the other way, but for the most part, we force this one-way workflow. So I'm just going to come back over and I'm going to jump to a property, and these are fictitious properties, by the way. We have 2 fictitious properties that we've set down in Grant County where no public lands are right now, so that we can actually test, demo, and do other things in the production environment. So if you'll notice, when I jumped over to the GIS side of the app, we have an aerial photo base map in the background, but none of these compartments or stands actually line up with anything on the ground because we simply grabbed a piece of property and slid it over to Grant County. So don't get too concerned about our foresters not actually being able to do their aerial photo interpretation. I landed on the compartment layer, but there's many other layers in the system that I have the ability to interact with, obviously. The top 13 layers here are in all caps to indicate to the foresters that these are layers that they have editability to. So typically, probably 95% of the time, is they work with the stands layer. And the stands layer is actually just a representative chunk of dirt that's basically a timber type. Roughly the same age, the same size. So you'll see like aspen of a certain size class of a certain density would make up a stand, as an example. If I zoom in on the map, these stands are represented by this light green line. There was actually a team of folks that worked a very long time trying to put all the proper colors together that would show up on color, black and white photos, color infrared photos. Hard to come up with a one-stop solution that fits everybody's needs. And we do get the question regularly, hey, I'd like to have this in a different color or this in a different style, and that's all fixed behind the system. The user has no control over that. I'm just going to play with the scenario that I have, just to show you some of the digitizing, that I may have another stand that I want to digitize into the system. I'm going to come under the editing tool group, and I'm just going to do a simple create of a new stand, and I'm just going to digitize some silly shape in the system here. And this stand is obviously going in on top of an existing stand, and without the clip features and other things like that you would use in a desktop application, we had to build some what we call spatial validation rules into the GIS so that our foresters didn't accidentally build that topology into the data layer. So I'm going to code this. I've described that this has to, you can't map until you have the recon done, so I'm just going to code it to an existing stand I know exists over on the tabular side. And I'm going to create that. Whoops. I should be authorized to do that. Well, let me go to the other test property. Oh, that's good here. Try that one more time. So that was an intentional demonstration of our edit authority and how we can keep people from editing outside of their own properties. Again. So that shape's being sent to back to the server and gets added to the interface, and it should pop up here in just a moment. That shape, I probably did it in the dead area now that I zoomed away from what I wanted. Yeah, I didn't overlap anything existing, so that shape just went into the system. So let me zoom back in. So I have an existing stand. If I created another stand that overlap that existing stand, you're going to see those spatial validation rules I was talking about. There we go. So we tried to keep as clean a topology layer as we could without having the ability to snap or control some of those other edit functions. So we do it behind the scenes. So when the system sees a new shape, as an example, that overlaps an existing shape in that same feature class, it says, hey, what do you want to do? You can't have them overlap and share space. So if you want to update that existing stand, you just overlap or cancel what you're doing. So yep, go ahead and update it, and you'll see that on the clip and everything is done in the background. The new shape is going to clip in, the old shape is going to move back. So here's the shape I had done previously, and the new shape's now tucked in nice and neat. And we've built a whole bunch of tools for polygon editing. Polygons drive the system. We have very few lines or points type layers. We have a few, but stand polygons drive the system. Autocomplete, just basically the opposite of what you just saw. If I digitize a new shape overlapping anything existing, it sees that and only allows the shape to go in where no shapes exist. We have the ability, if we get meets and bounds descriptions on stands, to put in a traverse tool. So we've built in all the different traversal methods, where you have a lat long, or you're going to calculate a point with a distance azimuth, or if you actually have the meets and bounds descriptions. And you'll see as I choose these, the interface changes to follow that description. So we have the ability to enter descriptions of a particular property or a stand as it was described and digitize it that way. Once I've finished with that and create that feature, it would do the exact same thing as if I just digitized the stand by freehand, which you just saw. Important other spatial validation rules we've built in is we have that container of the property, or what we call the WisFIRS management boundary. We control things that hang outside of that, so we give the user the ability to, if they were digitizing at the end of a property, the edge of a property, and they intentionally hung that stand outside there, it would clip to the property, so we have nice concurrent lines there. The thing we don't do in this system, and at the time when we built it wasn't an ability, and we get asked about it all the time, is the ability to snap to other layers. And when we were building the system, it just didn't exist at the time. You couldn't bring up another layer and use that snapping ability. So all those spatial validation rules are trying to get around ways of not being able to snap and still have a clean topological layer. We have many layers in the system that don't have editability. They're just there as reference information. Under the layer legend, we've got layers coming on by default, but that doesn't preclude the user from turning on and off all sorts of other layers for information. We can go down to the base map information. You can see we have our leaf off product. If we wanted to switch to that, we can put on the leaf off product. And the idea behind this is when new imagery becomes available, then we'll be able to just build it into the system. We kept these names pretty generic because then we don't have to go in and have the developer recode these dialog boxes. We can just build in the 2015 when that's available and replace the 2010. The leaf on product is the NAIP product. 2008 currently, we'll be able to put the 2010 in relatively soon. And we'll also have the color infrared imagery in here that Forestry flies relatively shortly on our next update as well. Anything specific you want to see in relation to the GIS app what I was thinking about when I saw this conference and the parcel mapping initiative was, think about our WisFIRS management boundary, our property boundary as a county parcel map, and the ability of multiple users feeding into a single database and then controlling it with sort of the same editability as we control. So I have all these users of the system, but the counties that manage that important data would still be able to push their updates up to the system, manage all those changes, while a statewide user database could see all those parcels. I can demo, some of the WisFIRS management boundary stuff or other creations like that, but I'm already 5 minutes over. So. Questions? Yes?
Can you show the random timber cruise points?
Sure.
I'd like to see how a forester would actually upload that information to timber cruise.
Well, depending on where they start, typically if this was a brand new property that had no recon done on it, they would have out their stereo pair. They'd be looking at the photo in WisFIRS, and they'd do some general digitizing of, this is where we think the stands are. So let's just say in this scenario, that's what I've done, and the stand actually represents what I think is what I'm going to see on the ground. We've built in a tool to either randomly or systematically generate cruise points on that selected feature. So you can see under here, the feature is selected. This info panel comes up every time I select a feature in the database, showing me, basically the attribute table about that chunk of dirt. And under the options, I have a cruise points tool in which I can just make a couple of choices. One is if I'm generating plots, I don't want any plots to fall right on the stand boundary because then half my plot's going to be out. So maybe I'm going to say, yes, I definitely want a setback on that. And maybe I'll have a setback of a half a chain. So I'll just make 33 feet setback so I know my plot's going to fit inside. And just for simplicity, I'm just going to say, give me 10 random points in there. And I generate that. It goes into a point layer we call the cruise point layer, so it's a completely different feature class in the system. That layer is not on by default, so what you see is the layer is selected, but we're actually not drawing the layer right now, so I got to come in and just draw the cruise points layer. If I zoom in just a little bit, you see our numbering system is just a stand combination of compartment stand and then a sequential number. Since they're random, you can see compartment 1 stand, plot 5 is up here. Those are selected. So when I bring up the info panel now, I've left the stand layer automatically, and the active layers become cruise points because that's what the tool selected from. And I have the option then of exporting that shape out of here so that I can upload it into a handheld GPS and head out in the field to find those cruise points. Yeah, Ann mentioned that we have a desktop solution. I don't have time to demo that, but we do have a tool we call Acorn. That's just a little Esri add-on to ArcMap 10.1. And what that does is it allows our power users that have a desktop GIS to create a shape. Maybe they have a parcel layer from the county and they want to really make sure that they've snapped to that ownership with the adjacent public lands. They can hit that button. That Acorn tool only has 4 tools in it. One to download shapes from WisFIRS and one to put one back, the 2 of the tools. One's to recode and one's to select related. Once they have that shape created though and they hit that button, it can go to one of 4 places. We have what we call staging layers. So you saw me editing right in the stands layer, which is right in the production environment. But we gave the users a sandbox or a stage layer for stands. If they don't want to do their edits right in the production environment, they use the stage layer until they get that shape the way they want it, and then they can copy it over to the production stand layer. So they make sure they get their edits correct before they put it over there. We have that same thing for the WisFIRS management boundary, and then some of our completed treatments and planned treatments layers. So if I was working with stands on the desktop GIS and I hit that upload, it would go into the stand stage layer of WisFIRS for the property I coded it for, and then I'd have to go over to WisFIRS and grab it from that stage layer and promote it to the production layer. So it's a 2-step process. Once it's promoted from the stage layer into the production layer is where it would hit our spatial validation rules so that we would know it fit into the rest of the feature class without causing any topology errors.
For that particular product, are you considering a geodatabase type replication versioning workflow?
You want to jump on that? Are we considering a replication geoprocessing?
Versioning?
Oh, version.
Yeah, I don't know the reason, but I know some of this forestry, so I'm not sure, but it's not a version of the database at this point. So, and I don't know that I heard any reason we need to go with
Did everybody hear that response? The short answer is no, it's not a version data.
Yeah.
Mike?
Do you see performance issues, more people are hitting that? And the second thing is, how are you coming up with those open boundary MFL and 3? Like if we can't even do that,
Yeah.
you know, with those sketches that you guys have, it is very crude.
First part of the question was performance issues based on user load, basically. But nobody's entering any data in WisFIRS on dial-up. I can tell you that. We've had an initiative internally to upgrade all of our forestry offices, even our co-located facilities, to at least a half a meg connection. And so we do have some very small offices out there that are only on a half meg connection, and they're able to enter WisFIRS just fine.
But you even have private users on
This, on the public lands, we do in county staff, but this is not the public lands application. We don't have the GIS portion of that yet. Just sticking on your load issue, right now we have probably 200, a little over 300 users of public lands WisFIRS. On a day-to-day basis, if I look at how many people are actually accessing the system, it's between about 30 and 50, usually in the morning. You can tell a lot of people come in, quickly go into the system, create some field maps, head out to the woods. We haven't run into performance issues that way. I don't know the answer on the private land side. It's obviously going to be a much more complicated interface, the GIS portion of that. We have the private lands tabular application built where we actually write up the plans, go into the system for managed forest law. We're just in the beginning phases, you know, going to go into sessions about how storyboarding, basically, how are we going to build that GIS application and handle some of the questions, you know, the open lands versus closed lands. Obviously, parcels is a huge part of that, the answer to that, and how that's going to perform. Because if we don't have parcels available to us and to the staff that's entering this, at least as a guide or something they can snap to or something they can use, you know, copy from one layer to another, I don't think the counties are going to get this back and think it's going to be usable at all. They're like, well, that doesn't line up with anything we do. So it's yet to be determined how that's going to happen. Parcels is going to be a big driver for that. Any other questions?
Is this open to land writers?
For public lands?
For any land?
Well, this
Land
is
writers have access to
this is the public lands version. The private lands version, if you're a consulting forester, and if you go through our certified plan writer class, then you have access. Yep. So we just hosted a class in May. We did one last November. They're usually between about 15 people usually sign up to go through that. Yeah. Once they're certified, they'll have a user account on the system and be able to go in. They'll only see plans that they draft for public lands. Right now we've locked the system so that they can't peruse statewide yet until we get our training done and part of the system for consulting foresters. We did want to give somebody a head start. For instance, I wonder what practices are coming due in Oneida County that I might, you know, have my business point out. Well, we didn't want to give somebody a competitive advantage. So right now they can't do those sorts of broader questions. But yes, all 99.9% of managed forest law plans are written by private people right now, you know, consulting foresters. This DNR is not in the plan writing business anymore. Any other questions? All right, thank you.